Do you think that money has an outsized role in politics?
What do you think? Oh, because I'm assuming you're now going to take it back to Rome after I say, of course it does.
Yes.
And then you're going to say, would it surprise you to know that in
Well,
Rome?
we're gonna get to that.
And I would
We're going to
say,
see how the
it would not
Roman
surprise
system was shockingly focused on money,
me.
but at the same time, how it was more honest than the American system.
Hey, man, welcome back to W2F History. It's been a little while, Mike. Of course, nobody watching knows that, just us. They have no concept of time as they pull something up. But great to see you again. I think we have some good shows today. I know you have something. Now, this is going to be a big surprise to everybody, but I think it's about Rome.
It is indeed about Rome.
Mm.
About Rome. Most people think about it many times a day, and I talk about it many times a day.
We should think about Rome many times a day because we are bred to be protectors, conquerors, hunters. I think that's why men think about Rome. This is not what we're going to talk about, by the way, but that is why we should think about Rome. I think it's inbred in men to think about Rome, things like Rome. Maybe not Rome in particular, but how do we protect those around us? How do we expand our property, to
Build an
hunt more
empire, defend an
gazelles?
empire. Yeah.
Yeah. So I hate when people do that and they try to make that like a put down. Oh, men thinking about Rome, dude. That's how we're bred. You know what I
Right.
mean? And we should be thinking that way, or else we're going to get conquered.
That's right.
Yeah. But
So today
anyway,
we're going to talk about a fascinating topic, and you got to bear with me. We're going to talk about Roman voting during the Roman Republic. Now, wait a second. Now, some of you might know that. So I taught upper division poli sci. When I left the California legislature, I taught upper division poli sci at USC. This was actually one of the most fascinating topics to my class: how the Romans conducted voting during the Roman Republic.
of course, it was a class full of men.
No, it had a lot of women too, and the women really liked it.
All right, good.
So let's start with some basic history, right? Rome has roughly 4 phases. First phase was the kingdom. Second phase was the republic. And the American Republic was modeled on the Roman Republic. The third phase was the empire, and arguably the fourth phase was the Byzantine Empire. We're talking about the Roman Republic. This was a democracy. I hate that term. It was a republic. But this was a time where Rome was not ruled by emperors. They had an electoral system. Okay, so why don't we start, David, by saying this, okay? You work in politics. You're one of the most brilliant lobbyists in the United States, certainly in California. Do you think that money has an outsized role in politics?
What do you think? Oh, because I'm assuming you're now going to take it back to Rome after I say, of course it does.
Yes.
And then you're going to say, would it surprise you to know that in
Well,
Rome?
we're going to get to that.
And I would
We're going to
say,
see how the
it would not
Roman
surprise me.
system was shockingly focused on money, but at the same time, how it was more honest than the American system.
Oh my God.
So let's get right into it.
Can I tell you something real
Yeah.
quick? I believe in California, or politics writ large, we should not have limits. You should just have instantaneous reporting. So if you want to give $1 million to Joe Blow, give $1 million to Joe Blow, but it has to be out there for the entire world to see and for Joe Blow to own. I took $1 million from, my God.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
where I'm coming from.
So, okay. So let's start with some more background material. So most people are familiar with the Bible and how, there's that line where it says, at that time, Caesar Augustus determined that the whole world should be counted. And of course, what the Bible is talking about is the ancient Roman tradition of the census. The census occurred every 4 years, and Roman citizens had to present themselves before a magistrate, and they had to say, hey, this is so-and-so, this is where I live. I'm here, I'm alive, this is how many kids I have, this is my wife's name, so on and so forth. But the most important thing that the Roman citizen had to do during the census was they also had to report their net worth. They didn't report their income. They reported their net worth. They said, I hold this much land, it produces this much, I hold this much cattle, I have this much gold. They had to report their net worth every 4 years. And everybody is saying, what does this have to do with voting? Well, you got as many votes as you reported. And I'm going to explain what that means. So if you went before a magistrate and you said, "Hey, my name is Elon Musk," and I mean, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm worth $173 billion. So tax me based on that vast net worth. I'm going to pay a ton of taxes. Here's my tax bill. You also got a corresponding number of votes.
Oh,
So we talk about how citizenship was different back in those days, right? It had a lot of duties. If you were a citizen, you were expected to serve your country in the military. You were expected to fight the wars. You're expected to learn about the government and be engaged and everything like that. Well, it shouldn't surprise people that they had a system where they felt like the people who had the most to lose should also have the biggest say in government. And it's also important to note that we're not talking about Rome when Rome was a world power. We are talking about Rome roughly in the period of 509 BC to about 216 BC. So we're talking the early days of the Roman Republic. Folks, this is before Rome became a world power by defeating Carthage 3 times. This is 200 years before Julius Caesar. This is when Rome was essentially an Italian city-state in central Italy. It could be invaded anytime, and the people who had the biggest holdings had the most to lose. So let's get right into how it worked. Okay. So as we said, every 4 years there would be a census, and they would ask you, what's your net worth? And you would be taxed on that. You would be taxed based on your self-reported honor system net worth. And people are like, well, why would anybody report that? Well, we already answered it. It's because you had a greater say in government based on what you self-reported. And this is how they did it. What Rome would do is, after every census, the censor, there was one magistrate who had this duty. The censor had to go through all the citizens and break them into 193 groups based on their wealth. And the 193 groups were called centuries. Why weren't there 100? Who knows? There were 193. And the first 192 were based on wealth. The 193rd century were people who had no net worth. They were called the capite censi, people who only had the head on their shoulders. That's what they were called. But everybody else was ranked according to wealth. So the very, very wealthiest group, let's say the Roman censor that year, decided to cut off the very, very first group as a net worth of greater than $500 billion. There might be one guy in that entire class. And then down at the very bottom, in the 192nd century, there might be a million citizens who have, $10 or $100 to their name. And of course, in the middle, there were all sorts of different classes. There was a class of billionaires. There was a class of, smaller billionaires. There was a group of multimillionaires. In the middle were the class that's called the equites, the equestrian class, for people who had enough money to pay for the upkeep of a horse. And again, you look at this notion of citizenship being a duty. Why was it important to know if someone could pay to keep up a horse? Because you were expected to ride your own horse in battle. These were before the time where the government provided gear for people in battle. So they needed to know how many men can support a horse. So this is how many guys we have to be in the cavalry battle. Right? So you're starting to see the big picture. But this is how the voting worked, David. And this is what is so amazing. To elect the highest offices in Rome, they had two presidents, sort of like a president and vice president. They called them consuls. They had censors, every 4 years who did this whole system. They had praetors, which were the equivalent of judges, kind of. They had all sorts of different high-ranking officials, much like we do. To elect them, they would get the centuries together and they would say, and you got to vote in the order of wealth. And as soon as a majority was reached, the election was over. So they would literally get people together and they would say, how does the first century vote? And the first century would be just Elon Musk. And Elon Musk would say, I cast my 193 billion votes for Donald Trump. And then they would go, okay, the second century is Bill Gates and George Soros. Guys, how do you cast your 100 billion votes? And they would say, we cast our 100 billion votes for Kamala Harris. And it would go down like that until one person got a majority.
So it's all public.
Yes, it was all public. And when I told my classes, I told a bunch of young idealistic political science students at USC this. Some were horrified. The wise ones were impressed. The ones who were horrified were like, oh my God, gross. They voted based on money. And the wealthy people drowned out the poor people. And the elections were often decided by the wealthy people. To which I countered, actually, their system was much like ours. You had oligarchs on the right, Elon Musk, and you had oligarchs on the left, George Soros. And so many times they would cast 100 billion votes for one candidate, the next one would cast 100 billion for the next candidate,
knock each other out.
And many elections, believe it or not, went to the 192nd or 193rd group, which is shocking. Number two, and this is really important. Again, we talked about how this was a time where Rome could be invaded. You could lose all that land that created all that wealth. They honestly felt like the people who might have vast land holdings on the border that could be affected, invaded by Carthage, they might actually have some greater wisdom. They might actually think, gee, I know what's going on, and so I'm going to vote for the candidate that's better for the direction of the country. Number three, the fascinating thing about this is how public it was, how open it was for people to understand. They would sort of get who was behind whatever candidate. And fourth, here's what is so important. We started the episode by talking about, does anybody doubt that money has an outsized effect in American politics? No. What do the wealthy do nowadays when they want to sway an election? They buy Twitter. They spend billions of dollars on ads. They go out there and they fund these shadow PACs and these super PACs and all these things to make sure that their candidates get elected. The Romans cut out the middleman. They just said, we're just going to give this guy all these votes so he doesn't have to do that. And if you think about it, that system was really, really honest in a weird way. It was very open. It was very honest. And it was also a fascinating way.
It appears to work, right? I mean, they lasted for what? I mean, well, I'm not going to argue with you how long they lasted because that's still up for debate because some people say they're still going. But I mean, it lasted, centuries.
The Roman Republic by itself, not the kingdom, not the empire, lasted well over 500 years.
Yeah.
The empire lasted another 500. I mean, think about this, right?
It worked. And, Mike, I always think that politics are decided by those with the most to lose. People think that it's decided with those with the most to gain. I think it's for those with the most to lose. And that's why you see people who at the rich people at the top who are backing candidates because they're worried about what they're going to lose if the other guy gets in there. Yeah, there are people who do it because they think, I'm going to score if this guy wins. I don't hear that as much. Usually I hear people who are giving out of fear of the other guy. It's those who have the most to lose. But what I like about what the Romans did is that they were public about it, right? They would be public. I'm sure, Marcus Publicus, whatever, when he gave his money, he would go, my money is behind Octavian because he is going to make sure we have grain growing, in the northern country. And we're not going to have to go out, right? I mean, they would make their arguments as to why they were donating so much of their dough.
Yeah.
No pun intended. But why they were donating their money to Octavian, right? Because he's going to keep the ag going.
Yeah, and here's the final concepts I'll leave you with. Number one, this Roman system about how they voted was called the Prerogative, and of course, it's where we get the word prerogative, right? It's like, well, it's my prerogative to go first, right? And that's how the word sort of came into English in a kind of bastardized version. But number two, and this is the other thing I'll leave you with, they really built in a way to make the IRS completely unneeded. Because could you imagine if there was like an honor system where you got something based on how much you self-reported in taxes? I mean, just imagine, like, everybody would be rushing. Well, lots of people who cared about the future of the country on both sides, Democrat, Republican, everything in the middle, would be rushing out to pay taxes. Like, I'll pay taxes if I get some more votes, right?
Yeah, right.
Just what a fascinating way. They literally, you would show up every 4 years, not every year, and you would declare your net worth, everything you owned, because you wanted to be bumped up in one of those.
Dude, that's a great way to look at it. That's a
And
great way to look at it. I didn't think about that. It encouraged honesty, right, in your
yes,
in your taxation. I
absolutely.
wonder what the tax rates were like in Rome, though. Did they really shave the guys at the top?
The tax rates were not that high. We don't have great data on it. The most important thing, and you're going to love this, and this is the great way to close. When the Roman Republic started conquering all these lands, they canceled the taxes for one group of people, Italians. They just said all of Italy doesn't have to pay taxes, and it was pretty funny because taxes had gone up and down based on wars up until that point.
Mhm.
But at some point, once Carthage was gone, once Gaul was pacified, it was like, well, God, we got enough gold coming in. Let's cancel taxes, which is funny that they did that, but they only canceled them for Italians, which is
That's very. Hey, that was fascinating, Mike. Do you think we'll go back to that? I mean, no, I'm sorry, not go back to it. Do you think that a system like that could work here?
I don't, but I'll tell you the one thing that I think is fascinating is the idea of some type of honor system for people who volunteer to do stuff. Right? It's we have some of these things, right? I mean, obviously, society does treat the wealthy far better. We try to honor veterans, which I think is really important. But you think about how it was also tied together back then. Can you support a horse to go charging into battle? You personally have to do it. Will you self-report so that you will say you have a greater say in the electoral system? I mean, it really, really fascinating how candid it was and how it encouraged honesty. And it really, this is why we study history. It's to learn about ourselves, not to learn about them. Is our system any better? Probably not.
Probably not. Hey, everybody, like, subscribe. Please subscribe. Please like it. Tell people about the show. Mike, that's a good one. Okay, when you told me about it, I was like, I don't know about this one. But no, that's good. I never knew that. I like it. I think my politics are a little different than yours. I do believe that people on welfare should have to do something. We could clean these streets up and get a lot of graffiti if we just had people put in 5 hours a week in order to get something back from the government. So I like the way that Rome did that, because I know in Rome you had to give back to the state, time or effort. Nothing was handed out for free. Maybe, at least in the beginning. I
Yeah.
don't know about the end.
Well,
Uh,
fantastic. Thanks everybody for watching. We hope you enjoyed this episode.
Hey, if you like what you hear, like and subscribe. It really means a lot, and we would love to have you coming back every week. Thank you.